So now, just to clarify and resume what we saw last time, we speak about the scope of the variables. As I said you, each attribute that I define with the keyword self.something is accessible in all the methods present in my class. So for example, you see that if I call the method accelerate of this object of the class Audi car, you see that this attribute is known because it's printed out, like you see here. Okay, here, maybe a space. So this attribute is known. Even if it's defined, for example, only on the initialization method. Let me show you. Okay, you see that it's known, even if it has a different value, but this method can access this attribute, although it's defined in another method, which is the constructor. Instead, for example, as I said you, this variable is not accessed into this method. As you see, okay, you see that acceleration time is not defined. Yeah, so this works for the classes. For example, let's see the scope of the variables in a function. Okay, here I defined a function in which I define the variable a equal to 0. Now, when I want to print the a, let's see what happens. Name a is not defined because the scope of the variable a is only inside this function, so this function named myFunction. Now, if I indent my print statement inside my function, see what happens. Let's try again. Nothing, because I didn't call the function, so I have to call it myFunction. Okay, now you see that a is known because I called the function and a is defined inside the function, and the scope of the variable a is inside the myFunction, and I call the print statement inside my function, in which I can join my variables. Okay, so the scope is very important for our project, and you must understand it very well, because otherwise you will make many errors. Okay, so remember that a scope of the variable is inside the nearest function in which it's defined. Instead, for example, the attributes in the class are accessible in all the methods. Okay. Now, for example, okay. Instead, here, as you see, in the while loop, the scope of the variable is all this, so not only inside here, but all our code. So let's try to make a different configuration. So for example, let's try to make like this. Okay, now I define my x inside my while loop. Check if I print my variable x outside of the while loop. Check what happens. Okay, you see that this time it's printed out, so the variable declared inside a while loop, for example, are accessible also outside the while loop, unless you are inside a function. So, for example, if I define a function, remember to indent correctly all the code, otherwise it does not work. Now I try to print my x inside of my function. So I try to print the x defined inside my function. I try to print the same variable outside of my function. You see now that the x is not defined because it's out of scope. So I only changed the fact that I defined this branch of code inside a function, and you see that the x is no more accessible. Okay, so I hope this is clear, and see you next time.